Let me just do the sound, which I always forget to do. We do most of our training on teams, and things are different teams. So let's hope this is working for everybody. Zena, is that coming through okay? Cool.
Okay.
So over to Helen.
Thank you, Miranda, and thank you, Zena, for the introduction. It's very nice to be here today. So thank you, and to be in the presence of people from such diverse workplaces and to share the power of empathy with you. Really, to introduce myself briefly, I'm Helen Demetriou. I'm from the University of Cambridge. I hope everyone can hear me. Can I, before I go on?
All good.
Fantastic. I've spent the last 30 years actually researching and writing about empathy, both within the fields of psychology and education. So starting with toddlers and looking into primary, secondary schools and what empathy can do for creativity and innovation more recently in my work. So, and what I want to say is it is an essential skill. It's essential for certainly the workplace with, I feel, what you're doing, but also for life itself, an essential life skill. And without it, arguably, I would say teams can't really collaborate, create, or innovate ultimately. So if we move on to the second slide, please. This just shows what empathy is, and it is the ability here, and I'm hoping you can identify two words with what it actually is. It's the ability to experience and understand other people's emotions and perspectives. And what this definition shows is the two-pronged dimensions of empathy, of the emotional side of it, the feeling side, but also, of course, the very important perspective-taking, cognitive, understanding side. And with these two elements together, it really is a huge force for life. So if we move on, please, to the next slide. Here, I just want to show you, again, more finally, the elements that empathy is made up of. And as you can see here, it is a vicious, if you like, cycle of events and components. So we have the feeling component that I mentioned just now, the emotional component of empathy, and that's where we resonate with other people's emotions. We actually feel what they're going through, and we're empathizing in that way. There's also that thinking, perspective-taking, cognitive component of empathy, where we use reason and imagination to work out how somebody else feels. So that too is a component of empathy. And what these two things together, or either or, can do, and this is the very important function of empathy, is that they can lead to action. And this is the acting component of this diagram, where we're inspired to help others, having experienced what they're feeling. So it's not just being able to think and feel, but it's actually being able to do something about it. And this is what we found in my latest research, which I will describe shortly. Next slide, please. And what we're going to show you here is a brief video which looks very powerfully at the difference between what sympathy is and what empathy is, because many people do conflate them, and there is a difference. So perhaps, Miranda, you could please play this video for us.
I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is so what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. Yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Okay. Thank you for that. I hope everyone can still hear me. And I hope also that you found that video quite interesting. I hope it didn't break up for you like it did a little bit for me, but it was looking at that subtle or not so subtle difference between sympathy and empathy. Now, moving on, the last bit of my piece here today is to talk to you about some of my most recent research at the university, actually in alliance with the engineering department. And what this research showed very powerfully is how empathy and the skill of empathy can drive innovation and creativity. So the way this research started, and it took place with children in secondary school, 12 to 14-year-olds, whose D&T classes, design and technology classes, were, if you like, re-examined. We wanted to make these classes much more authentic. I think 3 words when it comes to driving creativity, for me, there are 3 words. There's authenticity, unconditionality, and empathy. And if these components are made available anywhere in life, from the beginning of life, through school, through the workplace, then great results happen. And I think, I would argue, and I would hope you'd agree, that this is what we found in our research. So what we did was to give children who were 12 to 14 years of age an empathy teaching pack. It was literally teaching them empathy. And research has shown you can teach, if you like, this skill throughout the lifespan. And children were very receptive to it. The engineering department made us some fantastic props, which helped children understand what it was like to design for a user. So to make design authentic and real life, again, if you treat people with authenticity, they will respond with authenticity and great outcomes. And the whole idea here, and some of the props, and you can see it in the middle. I hope you can see the picture in the middle here of one of the pupils using these specific gloves that the engineering department made for us, which got the pupils to realize what it was like to be an older person with arthritis, and how therefore you would design certain things for people if they were inhibited with their motor skills, for example. So this was given to children to understand what it was like to be a designer. And the whole purpose of this innovation was actually a task to cure or to find a solution for asthma treatment for very young children. So when very young children are struggling to take their inhalers and they need them instantly, many of them become very distressed. So the task of our children was to try and find a solution to this asthma problem, where they could give them something, a prop, and taking into account all the stakeholders, so the parents, the teachers, the nurses, obviously the child themselves, and then ensuring that they could create something that would work. What was quite amazing about this research, and the NHS asked us to do this, by the way, is that one of our children came up with a, if you like, winning design that the NHS are now going to run with. So not just a great thing for learning in school, for understanding other people and understanding yourself in turn, but being able to produce a product that works, that is innovative, that is creative, that is authentic, and that is used in the workplace. And arguably, being able to use those powers that I mentioned earlier, of being emotional and also very cognitive, so the feeling and the thinking parts of empathy can drive action. And it's when we use certain things to do this that resonate and make sense to people that creativity does occur. This research was published, as you can see below here, with my colleague Bill Nicol, and we hope to do more of this, and I hope you've enjoyed listening, and thank you for your time today. And I'll move on to the next slide, and I think Miranda now.
Yeah, lovely. Thanks, Helen. Such fascinating research, and so great to be here with people interested in innovation from a very different perspective from those of mine and Helen. As Zena said, my background is innovating for social change. And Empathy Lab is still feels very much a startup. And one of my best things is kind of coming up with an idea and seeing how many people, kind of how contagious that idea is and what are the ways of kind of spreading that idea. So in 2014, I thought I was retiring from the previous charity that I founded. But I and my fellow founders were fascinated by a building body of research, scientific research, that reading builds empathy. And we set out to explore if our education system and our society was making enough of this link. Because if you think about it, the link is hugely powerful, because books and reading is wired into our educational and cultural life. And if that could also be doing sort of double service to build the crucial life skill of empathy, that's a really fascinating lever for change. So we started researching. We worked with 3 universities, Helen's and also Sussex and the Open University. And as we researched, we learned a great deal about empathy. Fascinating that we're not born with a fixed quantity of empathy. Empathetic people are made, not born. Only 10% of our empathic capacity is genetic. I find that very challenging and very inspiring. So just as if you're learning to drive, you're developing new neural pathways in your brain. Our brains are plastic, and we can develop empathy skills in the same way. And 98% of us, the scientists say, can build our empathy skills at any point in our lives, the 2% being sociopaths. This book by Jamil Zaki can really recommend, and he talks about the importance of knowing that empathy is a malleable skill to developing our motivation to learn about it. And my goodness, once you start thinking about empathy, it is so in the zeitgeist right now, crops up over and over again in discussions about what makes for good leadership, compassionate politics, good business, a force for good. And I don't know if you've picked up the very interesting discourse that businesses that have come out well of the pandemic are those who have treated their staff and their customers with real empathy. And of course, if you think about it, as Helen said, there's a big link between empathy and innovation and creativity, because it's an essential underpinning for developing the kinds of thriving teams who innovate and solve problems. And it's also very much about curiosity and the imagination, making imaginative leaps forward through a deeper understanding of where people are coming from, whether that's your team members, your customers, or your partners. And empathy has a central role to play in the future of our economies and workplaces. McKinsey estimates that in the US alone, by 2030, 45 million workers will be displaced by automation. And many commentators posit, and I'm sure you've picked up on all of this, that the way to make people irreplaceable is to strengthen those uniquely human skills: empathy, creativity, emotional intelligence. And this is a quote from the influential OECD, who have started very important work on social and emotional skills, talk about how we interact with each other's matters to our social cohesion, even to our economic growth. So all that means there's a huge interest in empathy education worldwide. Just if you Google it, you'll get 17 million results. And you in your workplaces need empathetic, imaginative, curious people. So how do we develop a pipeline of those people? How do we raise an empathy educated generation? So you've heard some of this from Helen, and I'll say a little bit more about Empathy Lab as approaching this. Our mission is to do just that, is to raise an empathy educated generation. And we're the first UK organisation to focus systematically on building skills and social activism through the power of reading. We're a cross-disciplinary team with deep experience in education, digital innovation, national reading programs, and social movements. And I think it's so fascinating to think how different the world would be if empathy was part of mainstream education, as it is, for instance, in Denmark. So as well as producing engineers, scientists, teachers, our education system will also be shaping empathetic humans, able to respond creatively to our world's problems. And these are surely the new frontiers where specialist knowledge is no longer a competitive advantage. So I think arguably the time is very right, and Empathy Lab's programs offer a very practical way of moving forwards. So we were sparked into being, as I said, by a fascinating body of scientific research life empathy, and that is based on how our brains respond to stories. And what this slide shows is the difference between the impact of stories and facts on our brains. If we hear simple facts, the diagram with fewer lighted up areas, that hits the language processing parts in the brain, and that's it, very little else happens. But things change dramatically when we're told a story. Very many more areas of our brains light up. And this is so powerful that your brain actually kids you into thinking you're there in the story. And any of you who are readers will know that feeling of being really, really caught up in a story. So the crucial link for empathy learning is that that means we experience characters and their feelings in stories as if they're almost real. And this helps us understand how other people who are not us work. And for children, if you think about that, experiencing other people and building their knowledge of the world through the safe distance of literature is a very powerful strategy. So as a startup, we've experimented like mad with how you would build on that link. And we've gradually built a program with, I think, major scaling potential, targeting children and young people and supporting the adults living and working with them. We have a schools program, largely happening in Wales, which I'll say a bit more about in a minute. an annual read for empathy collection for 4 to 16-year-olds, an annual empathy day every June, and some absolutely fascinating innovation work with authors and publishers. These are the 4 skills we particularly aim to build as an organisation. And if you think about it, these are skills that are valuable for everybody to learn, not just children. The ability to understand and reflect on other people's perspectives and feelings, the vocabulary to recognise and share your own and other people's feelings, strong empathic communication skills, and pro-social attitudes which develop all of this into taking action. So we equip teachers, librarians and parents with the tools to choose and use empathy-rich books and how to model empathic talking and listening in the process. And here are some from our 2022 collection, helping with perspective taking, putting empathy into action, understanding and sharing feelings. One of my particular favourites is Barbara Throws a Wobbler, which is all about how overtaken we can become by anger and how difficult it is to get out of that. It's an absolutely wonderful book. We're learning so much all the time as we work with schools, but we're finding that the systematic focus on empathy whilst using books and literacy work can be profound. Safe discussions using character as the focus instead of the technical aspects of the plot and the technical aspects of the book make a huge difference. And here's a teacher from Wales talking about the difference it has made in his school. We started with 11 pioneer schools in England. We're now working with around 1900, and we've trained teachers as far as afield as Mexico, Saudi Arabia and Australia. And their feedback is very, very powerful that this idea works. I wish I had more time to share the kind of energy and insights that come from this work and the impact, but just a few quotes which reinforce, I think, what Helen was saying, which is that you can educate for empathy. And every empathy day, we ask everybody to make empathy resolutions. So, and I particularly love this quiet one in green. My empathy resolution is not to judge people before I've got to know them better. This is from a year 5 pupil. And I just think, my goodness, how different the world would be if we all put that into action. And here is Layla in a very difficult area of Great Yarmouth, where attitudes to refugees and migrants are traditionally very, very hostile. And Layla's very brave teacher did a whole unit on empathy for refugees. And this quiet quote, "I used to think refugees were different from us, now I don't," I think is very, very telling. So if any of you are interested in following this up, there are 2 reports on our website that explain our methodology, which we have been developing in primary and secondary schools. Wales is absolutely fascinating. They've ripped up their old curriculum, reshaped a new curriculum with a much bigger focus on health and well-being, and empathy appears in the curriculum 35 times. So the idea that you can use existing work with literature to simultaneously build empathy skills is very powerful. I wanted to just share and ask you to just take a couple of minutes perhaps to do this yourselves. So we work with senior leadership teams in schools on creating a whole school ethos and culture around empathy and developing their empathy skills as adults. And one of the tools we used with them is a listening audit. And we asked them to reflect on whether they feel that all the staff, including themselves, have deep listening skills, because that's such an important foundation stone for empathic communication and building empathic teams. So I wonder if you might just take a couple of moments, and it's always a bit weird this because it goes a bit quiet while you just have a bit of a think, just to do this 1 to 10 scale. 10 is the highest. We've broken listening down into what we think are the main components of it. Really interested in any other feedback about whether there are other elements we should be including. And then maybe just share a couple of thoughts on doing this in chat. So we'll just spend 2 minutes doing this. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to move on. But if anybody would like to put any reflections in chat, that would be great. I have to say that my big challenge is always this last one, not offering advice and solutions and opinions, but really letting the person hearing what their own solutions are.
And we've actually got a couple in the chat as well, agreeing with you, Miranda, that they offer solutions way too quickly, and somebody else agreeing with that as well. And someone else thinking the same. It's so easy to do, isn't it?
It's so difficult, isn't it? My children always say, Mum, just listen. You don't need to try and fix it. And, you know, they're in their 30s now, but I'm still doing it. So, anyway, it's a lifelong journey, all this empathy stuff. So I'm just going to quickly finish about Empathy Day, because if this is striking a chord at all, there's a really brilliant opportunity for you to get involved. And we want new allies and new partners. So if any of you might be those, I'm just quickly going to outline the plans for Empathy Day. It's on the 9th of June this year with a run-up in May. It aims to help us all learn more about empathy and how to build it, has a specific focus on young people and working with their teachers and librarians, but lots of this is really applicable in workplace, in communities, in homes. So the theme this year is Empathy, Our Human Superpower. And if you think about it, it is pretty stonkingly amazing that we have neurons in our brains that allow us to understand how each other are feeling. There are 3 campaign strands. There's a sort of curated collection of books and short stories donated by some of our leading children's authors. In the orange, on Empathy Day itself, there's the most wonderful online festival led by some of our leading children's authors, Jacqueline Wilson, Michael Morpurgo, Cresta Cowell. And then crucially this year, we're trying out in true lab fashion, a challenge, which has 9 creative empathy boosting activities for absolutely everybody to do. And this is the aspect that I'd really love you to consider getting involved with yourself. So the 9 activities, I'll just pick out a couple of them, which I think could be relevant to the workplace, and we can perhaps send round some of the links afterwards.
Absolutely.
So there are empathy walks, which people have found really powerful. Go out into your local community with an empathy mindset and quietly observe what you see and how empathy might make more of a difference. Some people are doing these in schools, in workplaces, and then having team discussions about, well, where would empathy make a difference and how can we change things in our community? Then a human discoveries activity, pairing up in teams. A lot of the publishers we work with are going to do this over coffee and chat on Empathy Day. We'll have a series of prompt cards that just prompt the opening of a discussion, which might help you learn just a bit more about somebody you're working with. This can also obviously all be done in families and in schools. There's a listening switch power bank singling out 4 aspects of listening, which we're asking people to download and practice listening. Here are our contact details. As I say, would really love to be working with new partners. We're always looking for new sponsors. Most of us are still working as volunteers. So I'm going to stop there and stop sharing, so there's time for discussion. Over to you, Zena.
So if anybody has any questions for Miranda and Helen, please, as I say, either add them to the chat function or just unmute yourself. We've also got a couple of lovely comments in the chat. Sarah from Cottam says, I think I'm getting better at that last point you put up on the listening audit. I've recently learned the phrase, do you want advice or do you want to vent when speaking with friends? And learning just to listen if they want to vent, which I think is a super tip, actually.
And I love what Chris said. I've got better at giving a name to feelings. It's surprising the impact this has when you say it. It's so true. Yeah.
Miranda, I was going to say exactly the same. I like that comment as well. Yes, being able to describe, to give names to something helps. And for all ages, I want to say.
Yeah. And here, look, who's this nice Diana person saying, trying to do more of this in wider workplaces in Wales. Yeah, that would be really... Zena, are you able to capture the chat? Because I know it's different on Zoom from Teams, and I never know how to capture it because there's lots of lovely people to follow up with. Lindsay, you're saying you'd like to be an empathy champion.
So has anybody got any questions for Helen or Miranda, or any comments on what you've heard?
I'm going to...
Lindsay's put her hand up. Lindsay, if you'd like to.
The comments, really, absolutely fascinating stuff. And as a parent of 2 young girls and as an improvement lead in the NHS, fascinating. I've made so many notes this morning. I will be in contact.
Oh, Lindsay, do because we'll be producing a family pack for Empathy Day, doing family-centered versions of those challenges. And you could do those, which would be so cool, and get your school doing them as well. We're trying to involve lots more schools. So,
and we're actually on the England-Welsh border as well. So maybe if you can just tip over into Herefordshire, that would be fantastic.
Oh, great! Oh, please be in touch and
I will be. I will be.
Great.
Chris, you've got your hand up.
Thank you. It might be one that Diana, or I think Glynis is on I saw on the list from Academy and Welsh Government. But on the empathy walks you mentioned, Miranda, there was something that the Academy were doing around walk and talk and other things as part of their development programs. And I wonder if Glynis or Diana have got a link back in whether it'd be something useful for Academy to sort of pick up for Empathy Day.
Oh, great.
Yeah, I was thinking about that, Chris. I've made a note here about what we can do for the day. So yeah, I've got it there as an action to take back to the SMT. Thanks.
And there's some really interesting walks on our website. We tried out the idea last year. It went down a storm, and some are from authors, some are from children. There's a very interesting one from an assistant head where she did a walk in her school that I think is, you know, an interesting model in any workplace, really.
Lovely. And there's lots of comments actually on the website, and then I'll come to Alex, around the storytelling and how it lights up so many different areas of your brain. I mean, we were talking about it actually in terms of how do you kind of encourage people to adopt ideas, and talking about it more in terms of stories and the human impact rather than just facts and figures. So it was really interesting, I think, your comments around storytelling. We've got a few comments on the chat function about storytelling too.
And also, Zena, sorry, before Alex, can I just say something quickly about that? Because yes, great for lighting up those areas and impacting on empathy skills, etc. But also research has shown it has an impact on well-being and mental health, and for teachers in schools as well as the learners. So, you know, it's the dividends pay, you know, through these types of approaches is what I want to say. Yes, pays dividends.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Helen. Alex.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, nobody who knows me on this call will be remotely surprised that I'm asking about this, but I'm autistic. I'm on the autistic spectrum, and there is this assumption that I think has sort of like filtered down into schools and stuff. Well, quite a few false assumptions about autism. One of which is that autistic people are incapable of feeling empathy. And as valuable as some of the contributions from writers like Simon Baron-Cohen are, some of those ideas are quite sort of old-fashioned by this point. So how on things like school curriculums and within schools and among professionals like occupational therapists do we include people on the spectrum in conversations about empathy and make sure they're recognized as being able to feel emotion and be empathetic?
Sorry, Miranda, can I just say something quickly there? Is that all right? But just
yeah, of course, and then I'll follow through because it's fascinating.
Because just based on what you mentioned with the research, and I have worked closely with Simon Baron-Cohen as well, Alex, what it is, you're absolutely right. There has been a myth over the years that autistic people can't empathize. But as I mentioned in my talk, there are two different types of empathy. There's an emotional type of empathy, and there's a more cognitive perspective taking. Now, the emotional one, when you said it can't do, is the one autistic people can do very, very well, in fact. So what we call in psychology a theory of mind, sometimes researchers have said is not acquired by autistic people. Generally speaking, developmentally, by 4 years of age, people acquire that perspective-taking theory of mind side. But I want to say, as you say, a lot of this research is outdated. Certainly autistic people can absolutely do the emotional and empathic side of empathy. And I would argue certainly much more than that. And some of the literature and the materials we have in schools will certainly help that, because as Miranda said, our brains are plastic to a large degree. Things can change, and it depends what we offer learners to enable that. But it can happen, is what I want to say, Alex. That's from my perspective. And Miranda, sorry, you were going to say.
Yeah, just Alex, we're asked about this all the time in our training, and my fellow founder, Sarah Mears, is a librarian who led a movement in public libraries around autism-friendly libraries. So we're kind of learning more about it ourselves. One of the really cheering things at the moment, I think, is that there's some really strong children's literature coming through from people on the spectrum that's really building understanding, I think, of the whole area. So Elle McNichol is I don't know if you've come across, amazing children's novelist, and on our 22 list, we've got Abigail Balfe's book, which is called A Different Kind of Normal. And I think publishers are really waking up to producing literature from people with lived experience. So I'm really grateful for your question. Thank you.
I think there's also a really lovely comment on the chat function from Diana too, which is definitely worth a read for everyone as well. So I think we are kind of coming to the end of our session. Chris has made a point about empathy walks, and actually that's a great management tool too, and a different way of doing those walk and talks that perhaps we talk about in management speak, to think of it from more of that empathetic perspective. And I think so many of the things that you both talked about today, whilst clearly relevant for children, are so relevant for us in the business world as well. And I know today was that focus around empathy and creativity and innovation, but as I say, the listening audits and all of the different resources actually on the website, I think are perfect for us in business too. Miranda, I've noticed that you have put on a way to sign up to the Empathy Lab and your email. So for those of you who would like to get in touch directly me, then I absolutely encourage you to do so. And I really encourage you to take a look at the Empathy Lab website as well, and the resources available there. You're also welcome to join, as I say, any future conversations with ideasUK and our future knowledge nuggets. So I think Chris has just asked a couple of questions. Well, Chris has asked a question, just wondering about the role of librarians. Is there an opportunity for an ideasUK? I'm sure we can talk about that too. Annie's mentioned Miranda. Is it just teachers, or can parents join too? She says.
Oh yes, hugely, hugely. And
Brilliant.
We'd love to have some parents on our training. We're doing a course in April across 2 half days, exploring in more depth this research and very practical work around books and empathy. And we'd love to have any of you on that as well.
Super. Annie says yes, please, straight away. But thank you to our fabulous speakers, Miranda and Helen, for sharing or really just scratching the surface of what is such a huge topic. And thank you to all of you for being part of the conversation, for adding your insights and questions as well. And as I say, we do hope to see you again shortly, and I'm sure many of you will be in touch with Miranda. And I hope you also take something and do something for Empathy Day on the 9th of June. So we'd be delighted to hear what you do get up to and share those with Miranda and Helen too. So thank you very much to everyone, and I will bring the session to a close. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zena.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks all. Bye.
Bye-bye.
I'm going to read the last comment though. It was really inspiring. I thought that's a lovely comment to finish on.